Good afternoon and welcome to another A-Push video with Mr. Pate. Today we're looking at domestic policy in the Federalist era, and our topic is called Competing Visions for America, Domestic Policy in the Federalist Era. We're going to look at what these competing visions were. The essential question we have for today is, what occurred in domestic policy during the Washington presidency that contributed to the rise of political parties? Here we go. Alright, well, to look at this, first we've got Hamilton versus Jefferson. Hamilton wants to have a British-style, strong, very powerful industrial nation. He wants to be a leading industrial country on the earth. He knows that to have that he needs a strong centralized government. Okay? And he's in favor of tariffs to help establish that. And again, he wants industry, he wants a mixed economy where you have agriculture, you have industry, you have the whole package. Jefferson wants a smaller, less centralized government. He wants to have a little bit more power to the states. He wants to have an agrarian, that is an agricultural-based society with only a small amount of industry, just enough to kind of serve the agriculture and make things work. Jefferson wants free trade. So in a lot of ways, their visions of where America will go, or how they see America going, are diametrically opposed. They're very, very different, and one's going to get what they want, the other one isn't. Okay, so that's kind of just background. They see the future of America very differently. Hamilton's economic program. He comes up with shortly after Washington goes into the presidency, 1791, and says, 5-point plan. Okay, if you're watching a presidential debate today, they'd be like, I've got a 7-point plan, I've got a 5-point plan, I've got a 4-point plan. They always have some sort of a plan with a bunch of points. Well, Hamilton does have a 5-point plan, and he says these are things we need to do to get America off, on the right foot economically and to be basically in good shape. So the first thing he says is we got to fix the nation's credit. Okay. So the first two things both are dealing with the credit of the United States. And the credit is basically like America's ability to borrow money with a good credit rating, something that we guard very carefully, but it has been in a little more question and a little more concern about it in recent years. The assumption plan said the United States government will assume all state debts and pay them off. So this meant that every state would have like a clean slate and have no debt, which sounded great, unless you are a southern state that had no debts at that time. This sounded less great. It sounded like to Jefferson that this was an attempt to have the federal government take more control over the state government. Now this is an important thing to know at this point in time. And we're going to see this coming up with something down here at the bottom. You have this idea, some people have this idea, they think that basically the states had basically made the Constitution and formed the federal government. And if that was true, then the states would technically trump, they would be able to kind of veto out things that the federal government did. This is called the compact theory. Okay? And then, we have another viewpoint, which is popular sovereignty. And popular sovereignty is basically saying all power comes from the people, but basically we the people at the beginning of the Constitution, we the people, that is basically saying all power comes from the people, the individual people of the country. It's not from the states. So the government is responsible to the people. It's not subject to the states. The Constitution, as it's interpreted in present day in the United States today in the 21st century, does not assume the states are, in charge. But a lot of people at this early point, only a few years into this time period of having a Constitution, they are going to be making the case saying it is. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, you will see this, okay? All right, so these things are dealing with credit. So the southern states are not very excited about the assumption plan. They're saying this is going to lead to us being beholden to the federal government more. And again, since some of their leaders, they believe in and adhere to the compact theory, they're saying this is going to subordinate the states more. We don't want that. Okay, well, the Constitution does have a supremacy clause saying it is supreme over the states, but it is not, it's just a debatable issue at this point. Hamilton strikes a deal with Jefferson and says, okay, instead of having New York or Philadelphia be the nation's capital, we'll move it to the south, carve out new land in the south, which becomes donated by Maryland and Virginia, becomes the District of Columbia, and the capital is in D.C. to this day. This did in some ways strengthen the national government, and Jefferson felt like he got a raw deal even though the capital was moved to the south. Okay, so that's the assumption plan, and it helped out the northern states, and it does repair the credit of these states and allow the federal government to pay it off. Funding at par. So bonds have been issued all the way back into the Revolutionary period, which by now is like 15, 20 years before. War bonds given to all kinds of people that they would basically loan the government money during the war, and the government said, at some point in the future, we will give you, we'll give you this amount of money plus interest back. We've had war bonds in other wars, same concept as a savings bond today. Well, these bonds had never been paid off. So Hamilton says, for our nation to have a good credit rating where we can borrow money and people will trust us financially, we need to pay off all our debts. So he says, we're going to pay these by funding it at par. Par in golf is you get the even amount of strokes you're supposed to. Basically, this was paid off at 100% plus interest as it was supposed to be. Well, the controversy here is going to be a lot of them, people had given up, and speculators heard that it was going to be funded at par, raced out into the countryside, bought a bunch of these off of unsuspecting poor people. Remember, no cell phones, no internet. So they are going to hear this, oh, it's going to be funded at par. They don't know that. Okay, the speculators know it, buy up all these. To them, they're saying this has been something I've been waiting over a decade to get reimbursed. So when someone pays them 50 cents on a dollar, 25 cents on a dollar, 15 cents on a dollar, they're going to be feeling good about it until they hear about funding at par, and now they feel ripped off. But Hamilton is going to get these passed, and he is successfully going to repair the nation's credit where the United States gets a strong credit rating. That was a good and important thing to do. Protective tariff. Hamilton said, to establish my vision of an industrial country, we need to have a protective tariff that essentially puts the United States, it protects infant industries. As industry starts up in the United States, we will not be able to compete with the long-standing industry of Britain and France. Thus, we need a tariff that's a tax on imported goods. We need to have that in place to protect those goods. Okay? That things made in America will tack on money to the things made elsewhere so that the price is competitive, and then people will buy American, and it'll help us develop industry here. The tariff also passes. This is going to kind of rankle the Southerners because they tend to be farmers. The industry is all going to be in the Northeast at this time, at least, as it develops in the early 1800s. And when the tariff happens, they aren't taxing things that are leaving, it's things that are coming in. So if you're a farmer, you're not getting any bonus out of this. You're only seeing that it's going to make things cost more for you as a Southern farmer. So Southern farmers didn't like it. So you're already seeing some controversy with this. Southern states not real happy about having the states, beholden to the federal government. Funding at par, some people kind of get ripped off. A protective tariff, Southerners are saying this doesn't really help us very much. Okay, excise tax. So Hamilton said another way we're going to raise some revenue in addition to the tariff, which would protect industries and make money. Excise tax on whiskey. This is going to make a lot of backcountry whiskey distillers very angry. People who, this was a big part of their economy actually. It leads to the Whiskey Rebellion. And the Whiskey Rebellion is an interesting contrast because it's a very similar popular uprising in terms of how it starts happening, not the causes of it, but how it starts happening to Shays Rebellion. And yet, the Whiskey Rebellion is going to be a situation where, in fact, this time instead, Hamilton is going to lead out the army at Washington's request, and quickly, the Whiskey Rebellion is dispersed. And so, as where Shays Rebellion almost topples the state, the Whiskey Rebellion is quickly put out and snuffed out at this time. And this will actually be the one thing Jefferson will get rid of when he comes in. He keeps all the rest of the financial program, even though at this time he's very, very critical of it. The last one and the most important one is the National Bank. The National Bank is of great importance because it leads us right into the item below. Interpretation of the Constitution. So you have two different views of the Constitution because you have something called the elastic clause. The elastic clause, or the necessary and proper clause, is in the Constitution, and it basically says Congress may make laws to establish things to support these things we already have in place. So for instance, the power to tax. Well, Hamilton says we have to have a national bank to hold the money of the government because we have a power to tax. This is fulfilling that basically power. So it's necessary and proper to carry out the expressed power of the power to tax. You have to have that. So that's the elastic clause, or necessary and proper clause, as it's more formally known. Well, this leads to different interpretations. So on the one hand, you have someone like Jefferson who says we have a strict interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution, it only says what it says. Nothing else. We're not going to expand it at all. Hamilton, on the other hand, is going to have a loose interpretation of the Constitution, saying, oh yeah, elastic clause is where it's at. We're going to definitely use that. Well, this becomes a big battle, and over the National Bank specifically, this battle of how the Constitution will be interpreted, it really is a showdown between Hamilton and Jefferson, with Washington deciding. They both make their arguments. Washington, with some reservations, does support Hamilton's view, and the National Bank is passed. Now, this is going to be a key factor in the establishment of political parties. You have some different things that are kind of making the Jeffersonian supporters, who come to be called Jeffersonian Republicans or Democrat Republicans, they are going to be ticked off about several of these things, but they're really mad because they feel like the common man, the farmer, is the one losing in all of these things. Okay? But with the National Bank, now they feel like, well, this is really going to expand the size of the government, and Hamilton's vision's coming true, and this is a terrible thing. So they start to form into a faction that is basically anti-Hamilton's program and what the Federalists are doing. Okay, the last thing, shooting forward to the Adams presidency later on, because all these things do eventually pass, even though there's some controversy, for domestic events, because a lot of it's foreign policies you'll see on the next video, but the Alien Sedition Acts. The Alien Sedition Acts, you have basically immigrants could be deported by the president or the president's order, and anyone who did disloyal talk or was against the government in what they said, they could be jailed. So this could apply to people printing things, who were in newspapers, or all kinds of different things. Well, you're going to have some Democrat Republicans get jailed or fined. They're getting punished and charged under the Sedition Act. Some people are going to be deported out who are immigrants. Now, critics of this would say this is basically just a power grab by the Federalists, and they're trying to suppress dissent, people criticizing them, and get rid of some of the immigrants, also known as aliens, that were out there that would tend to come in and be supporters of Jefferson and the Democrat Republicans. So, and that's a fairly accurate view. So what's going to happen is Jefferson and Madison are going to pen these documents called the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions. Okay, basically they set up this idea that is going to be a huge problem leading up to the Civil War that we see later on. They came up with this theory of nullification. And nullification, as they saw it, was that a situation where the federal government, if they passed a law and states thought the law was unconstitutional, the states could nullify the law and refuse to follow it. That's what they came up with as an idea. Now, this is going to be a theory they just throw out there. Jefferson's going to become the next president. You'll see a few videos down the road and as you're reading your book. But he will get rid of, they'll overturn the Alien Sedition Acts. But this idea just kind of hangs out here as this theory until it's grabbed by John Calhoun during the Jackson years. And that's when trouble starts to emerge. So what we see, this kind of idea of the compact theory that the state's making the government, it's kind of cropping up here again. And this is a problem. Southern states are really going to buy into this compact theory and say, see, the states cannot be told what to do by the federal government. Well, that partially answers what contributes to the rise of political parties. Hamilton's economic program, interpretation of the Constitution, different visions of America, and the Alien Sedition Acts and their responses. We'll hear more about foreign policy causes of the rise of parties on our next video, but that's all the time we have for today. Stay classy.